What's going on, Digital Wildcatters? Welcome to another week of BDE. I'm back. I've been out for a few weeks. Chuck's out. Heard that he was getting his prostate checked. So
he says he was going to Vegas to play in a big card game, but I think he was getting his prostate checked.
You think this ongoing prostate thing might be contagious or viral or something?
It must be. It's in the water.
You guys are together a lot, right? So
yeah, it's definitely infectious. So this week, Chuck is at World's Oilman Poker Tournament, which I don't have enough money to play in, so that's why I'm not up there. But then he went to a Shania Twain concert in Seattle. So, that's what I was like, Shania Twain, that's kind of random. He said his friend was opening up for her, though, so
of course.
That's why. But
he's such a baller.
It's good to be back on the show.
It's good to have you
back with my two bros here. So what do we got going on in energy? Who's got the rundown for us, Mark?
I think revisiting Exxon's earnings from Friday will kind of segue into something else somewhat related, but they had a pretty solid beat, and it was only their seventh highest quarterly profit, even though the way the media has been treating big oil's earnings over the last few quarters has been more about greed and record profits. And I did see that.
Actually, I had a tweet typed up. I was like, I'm proud of Exxon for having record profits. Like, celebrate capitalism. That's the point of a business, is to make money. So
I mean, everyone's pretty nuts over how much money they make, but in comparison to Apple, what is it?
Well, for the quarter, Exxon was around $11 billion in earnings. Apple, which hasn't reported yet, at least last I looked, the estimates were about 2x that. So I guess as Robert Reich tweeted after Exxon's report, they were raking it in at $11 billion, and once again tried to connect corporate profitability with the cause of inflation.
This is what I don't even look at Apple as a whole company. Look at AirPods, the business. And this isn't earnings. This is gross revenue. But in 2020, they had $23 billion in revenue from AirPods. Last year, they had $12 billion in revenue from AirPods. I mean, that's fucking insane.
I mean, but when you think about it, what Exxon does is just bringing energy to the world. No big deal.
Yeah.
Apple brings enjoyment to the world. Now, we couldn't charge those AirPods without energy, but screw that.
It's the only way I can understand
I've
that.
actually been super disappointed with my AirPods lately. Like, AirPods used to be like, I used to like, dude, this is an amazing product. And for some reason, over time, my enjoyment of AirPods has declined.
I bought some AirPods, and one of them won't sync, and then they have the how to sync them, and then they don't, and then they're like, we'll change the size,
and then they'll change between your computer and your phone.
It's
terrible. The battery's dying, and so not a huge AirPod fan anymore. But I digress.
Someone call them. By the way, speaking of Exxon,
call Steve Jobs.
I do. I mean, I think we need a seance for that, but
bust out the Ouija board.
But I will say, despite Exxon's earnings, did you see the sort of the viral video of the supposed Tesla burning in their parking garage?
Yes.
Oh yeah, let's talk.
So Kirk
refuted it. He had firsthand.
I've got the real scoop from a few of my Exxon executive insiders.
Okay, first,
this is really what happened.
Get some context first, because this is what happened. This is actually going viral on Twitter. Was someone posted that a vehicle was on fire in Exxon's campus here in Houston, up in the Woodlands, and showed a video of a car fire, but you could only see it was outside the building, so you couldn't see what type of car it was. But they're like, oh, it's a Tesla. So what's the irony that a Tesla is burning up, all these other ICE vehicles at Exxon? Now you have context.
Well, so everyone thought it was a Tesla, and it was a great story because everyone wants it to be a Tesla, right? This is the reality, and it's just so good. The fire was started at ExxonMobil from a dude smoking in his car, forgot to put it out, and he had gas tanks in the back of his truck.
Jesus Christ.
Laugh out loud. So this
there's going to be a policy at Exxon now that's going to be very specific to that.
Now that makes sense to me. Not a Tesla burning up would be kind of funny, but it's some dude in his truck with gas cans, and he forgets to put his cig out.
So I thought initially you said it was an e-cig.
I thought it was.
So we thought it was a vape, and we started an anti-vape campaign. Vaping's already lame enough. But
I think these were cowboy killers. I mean, just true,
So
like
the
maybe
dude,
no filter.
Dragon cigs, got the Marlboros in the truck, gas cans. That's bad. On the Tesla irony thing, I don't know if y'all saw this video, but over in Europe, I think it's Europe or maybe it's Atlanta. I can't remember. They're both very similar,
Same
right? Yeah. Oil protesters shut down the road, sitting in the road. You know how they do it, and they're sitting there. And they're demanding that oil and gas, we stop fossil fuel usage. And I mean, back up the entire highway, just fucking.
I think this is LA.
Hundreds,
right?
if not thousands of cars. I can't remember. I said Europe and Atlanta. There's a wide gap in between there. So
could be LA, but
wherever.
whatever.
But I saw it a couple days ago. But the funniest thing about it is the two front cars in the line are Teslas. That's just like the irony of this now is good.
Right.
It's getting good. So you're stopping these people from getting to work, and they're not.
One of them was trying to get to an interview.
Mm-hmm.
That
was it. Yeah, she was complaining.
Kind of make or break in terms of her being able to
she said
save the world,
stay in her house. And
it was a lady. She said she hadn't had a job in 3 months, and she had an interview, and these people are blocking the road. So, I just found that funny with the irony if you're saying ban fossil fuels and you're actually hurting people with Teslas.
Ask Pickering to tell you his parking garage story about cars burning up at Intercontinental. This was a long time ago.
Does he have one?
Yeah, he came back to a Lexus that was burned to the ground. I think they were doing some construction work.
I was talking
Intercontinental, and
some people on Twitter were bashing EVs, because I said that EVs are a better product in certain circumstances than ICE vehicles. Like I would rather have an EV to, traveling back and forth from work in the house in Houston. And someone is like, yeah, except for, they explode and catch on fire, and showed them a video last year. My mom's Tahoe burned to the ground while she was driving it, like on the highway, starts smelling smoke. She barely got her dog out, her German Shepherd, all of its hair burned off and burned to the ground. I'm like, look, like mechanical things.
Maybe we should invent some AirPods that run off gasoline.
Go kick on the generator to power up my AirPods. Sorry, so I didn't mean to get you off track. You said Exxon was going to be a good segue into something. What's a segue?
Just button up. Exxon's earnings last Friday.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a raft of E&P earnings coming up. Kind of one day of a pop of performance on good numbers, but today we're kind of back to the worries of banking, manufacturing weakness in China. It is the macro driving stock performance in the sector. Starting to see comments about softening prices on leading edge rig fronts, particular vulnerability in the gassier basins, which we've been expecting to see. So, stay tuned and be careful trading them out there.
Yeah.
The Exxon segue has to do with last week's announcement that Scott Sheffield is retiring again.
Oh, yeah.
He retired in 2016. He's now 70, I think close to 71. And I think, prior to COVID, he had told the board that this was going to be for 3 years. It ended up being almost 5. And so with all this.
Oh, did he tell him that?
He did.
I love Twitter because you never get context on stuff
Ever.
like that. Like the only takes you got was so he came out of retirement just for enough time to buy his son's company and then retire again.
Yeah, and it was something about got into consolidation mode in the midst of COVID with Parsley, and I'm drawing a blank on the other significant deal, which is but
Double Eagle.
Yeah, Double Eagle. That's right. Sorry. And so this 7 or 8 month off ramp. His retirement will be effective the 31st of this year, December 31st of this year. That's the same essentially succession or transition that he had with Tim Dove back in 2016. And so,
be interesting. Do you think there's real, what does that signify if there's rumors that Exxon's going to acquire him and then the CEO bounces or says that he's going to retire? Do you think
Dealey's his successor, Richard Dealey, is essentially a PXD lifer, and is a PXD culture guy, and I think very well known to the board, and so I think they're all very aligned, on all of this. So I don't think it makes any difference.
Yeah,
we should celebrate Sheffield. He was one of the first pioneering Permian Basin. So He went and took Pioneer to be one of the largest producers in the Permian. He was a big focus on shareholder value. So he really cut bad projects, really focused on share buybacks and returning excess cash to shareholders. He was big on innovation. So my friend Sheffield, I mean, he was big about developing new technologies. I remember, I mean, Pioneer has always sort of been one step ahead of everyone else about new technology, not only being thought about, but being implemented in the oil patch, which is Sheffield 100%. And you know, he's also in the Texas Business Hall of Fame as of 2019.
Oh, really?
Well, he also literally took them around the world. If some may only know them as a Permian shale pure play, they were in Gabon, they were in Tunisia, they were in South Africa, they were in Argentina, they were in Alaska.
I think they were in North Slope for a while too.
Easy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the merger with Evergreen put them in Raton Basin CBM
Yeah.
many years ago, and then coming, I guess, back to their origins.
Also,
forget
used
when
to
the
be one of
last
the largest producers of helium.
Yeah.
Which is another topic, but there's
Yeah. I was like, where are we going there?
Yeah.
I think this is a natural continuation of what was in motion. And
Absolutely.
it's a very careful succession and handoff. So to your question, I don't think it really
matters.
I don't think it matters that
significant.
much. It's interesting to talk about.
So speaking of Permian operators, Oxy unveiled their direct air capture project out in West Texas. Did you guys see this?
It was on 60 Minutes.
Was it on 60
I think
Minutes?
Vicky was on 60 Minutes. Was it last night? I
Can't
didn't
believe
see it.
They didn't come on BDE.
Then it's not important.
It's not. Lots of friends out there. It's actually funny. This dude hits me up. He's a partner at Lower Carbon Ventures, which is Chris Saka's VC fund. He's like, hey, dude. He's like, I met one of your friends, Moji. He was telling me all about digital wildcatters. Want to link up? He's like, I have an extra day in Midland. He's like, I want to go see some infrastructure. So,
Oh, that's okay.
I had one of my West Texas boys take him out to a LNG facility that's also using Bitcoin mining to mitigate their flare. So, but yet a lot of people in Midland for that. I saw some interesting commentary from one of my friends, Mike Umbro, on Twitter. Mike Umbro's always got a lot of good opinions on things, but his opinion on this was the last thing that the oil and gas industry needs to be focusing on is direct air capture and focusing on methane mitigation. Like if you're flaring any methane, that needs to be priority number one. Thought that was an interesting take. I don't know. I don't have any data on Oxy's flaring and what they've done out in the Permian. But do y'all think direct air capture is like, where do y'all stand on that?
So I'll just add one little detail from Umbro's tweet. He said, instead of spending $1 billion on direct air capture that'll essentially offset 200,000 cars, how about plugging Oxy's wells and shut-in wells or abandoned wells in California, right? So so you're the direct air capture guy.
Well, there's a couple things you said in that. First is, why not focus on methane emissions? The oil companies are scared, and they rightfully should be, because as regulation comes down, the regulators will find more and more methane leaks. And I've found, being in the business, especially investing in the business, you want to invest in things that can grow and become new business opportunities or generate profits, et cetera. You rarely want to invest in things that either increase safety or increase regulation. Like methane emissions is a big deal, but it's really hard for boards and for assets to invest in making it better because it doesn't generate money. And so that's the reality. Now, direct air capture, let's move over to that technology.
Well,
we can kind
of segue here, because direct air capture doesn't make money either. The way that it's monetized is through financial engineering, which is carbon credits, right? And so,
that is a moneymaker. So, you could argue that long term.
But couldn't you do that same thing for methane mitigation as well?
I think there needs to be a marketplace that develops, but I don't think the oil companies will lead with that.
Yeah.
Because it's just pointing the finger back at, they might have a problem, and no one wants to say, hey, we're the biggest methane leak on the planet. Come look at us. No one wants to do it.
Yeah.
In fact, I've invested in quite a few methane leak companies, and they have really struggled. That's where I've gotten most of my knowledge, is not only looking at technology, but having invested and listening to how hard it is for them to get their foot in the door. No one wants to address the issue.
That's super interesting because you talk to companies like Diamondback, Devon. I mean, they're all pushing extremely hard on methane mitigation. You look at Diamondback, I mean, they're taking methane emissions to zero on a lot of their on their pads and their assets. And even from like, you could even back out the climate change portion of it. I mean, you think E&Ps would be incentivized to do this because you're literally leaking
It's a
off your-
value product,
Yeah,
right?
No,
you're
absolutely.
leaking your product into the atmosphere. You want to capture
No, it's an
that,
incredibly
right? So-
right thing to do, but
Yeah.
that kind of brings me back to, I don't know Richard Dealey, so he can come on the show and let's meet him. But when CEOs transitions going back to Pioneer, like Sheffield was literally a pioneer. What is this new CEO? What sort of, like, a lot of times I think about, well, he's a lifer, and not when we see CEO changes, a lot of times it's like more of the same.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing new. I think that's in methane mitigation, going kind of switching topics quickly. A lot of it is the leadership not wanting to address it. There's bigger fish to fry, if you will.
Mhm.
Direct air capture is an incredibly bright, shiny object
Mm-hmm.
that everyone loves to look at. And it's ridiculous technology. I have yet to see a technology that truly impresses me about how much energy it requires to capture air to give you CO2 reduction. It
Mhm.
almost doesn't make sense. It's sort of like back in the algae days, where the one question that no one could answer is, wait a minute, for algae to produce energy and oil, how much land do you need to do that? And people are like, oh, don't worry about
I
that.
mean, it's what we're finding out right now with ethanol. I mean, getting the hard facts on that, it just with the amount of land and water and other resources, it ends up being worse.
Does it affect the local vegetation since you're sucking the CO2
That's
away
my question.
from the
I
plants?
asked that question. The
Another
other day.
great question.
I asked that question the other day because I want to see some real studies on that. Is like, hey, yeah, it's cool to have direct air capture out in West Texas. There's no plants. Or, they're putting one down on King Ranch, which also just a lot of
Mhm.
tumbleweeds, mesquite. But you start putting these places in other areas where there is vegetation. What happens when you suck all the CO2 out of the atmosphere from around those places? Do you starve out local vegetation and end up having negative second order effects? And I have no idea. I'm like genuinely asking that. Like, I could sound like a complete dumbass asking that question, but
No, that's a great question. I don't think it's been answered. And let's go back to another one. If you think about those that invest in these technologies, so the venture capital people, not the funds like Lower Carbon Ventures, but like the CVCs of the world,
Yeah.
and their executives above them, what technology would you rather talk about when you've made an investment? Hey, I just invested in direct air capture. That puts you on the radar of like
yeah,
super status.
yeah,
We just invested in a methane emissions technology. No one cares.
yeah.
It's
No,
not something you
100%.
want to
Yeah.
talk about.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, oh, well, you should be doing that.
But,
right?
but methane mitigation is really your license to operate, which is fundamental. And so companies like Diamondback and I think EQT as well have talked
Mhm.
about what they're doing proactively.
Yeah.
That is an addressable thing. Forget about the emissions part of it. It is a capture of a value product, although it's also more impactful because methane is 20 times the heat trapping dynamic
40,
of
I
CO2
believe.
or 40. It's a big,
And I think
it's a
it'll
big
have
multiple.
it'll show up in shareholder returns. By the way,
What I think direct air capture is going to show as well, with this uncertain returns profile, is we've seen the majors, in particular BP, and to a lesser extent Shell, tap the brakes a little bit about their transition related investments. It's because of the opaqueness or the ambiguity around what the returns are going to do. And you've seen how the market has treated that, right? So I think direct air capture, if we start talking about, putting billions of dollars into steel and concrete and whatever else these facilities need to do, I don't know what the cost structure looks like. What is that going to do to your overall returns profile if
Yeah.
you've got a significant amount of your capital tied up in
And we've looked
direct air capture.
at when
I'm
I've
not
looked
saying
at
it's not the right thing to do. I just don't know.
when I've looked at carbon capture technologies to invest in, we always try to calculate what do we think the carbon price needs to be for this to break even, and the number is just not even close to. We're not even close to that.
It's got to be interesting from an investor perspective. If you look at investing in Oxy, how do you value them now? Are they an oil and gas company? Or are you taking a big bet on, they become a carbon capture company? I think Oxy's already one of the biggest operators of CO2 floods, but it's like, how do you adjust for that risk? And hey, does this work or does this not work? Because you look at it and it's very premature technology, right? And so it's almost like you have this like fundamental technology risk of what if this flops?
Go. Have you ever seen a direct air capture machine? They're gigantic.
I've never seen one.
And you sort of just scratch your head going, how does this mathematically work?
Yeah.
It's interesting, but
I've always kind of wondered,
good for Oxy.
Like if you look at like dehumidifiers, like you put one in a room and it sucks in this air and, you strip out all the water. It's kind of the same, same principle.
I had supposedly asthma growing up. And so I always slept with a dehumidifier in my room.
Oh yeah.
And then I realized my parents smoked. And then once I
got the asthma.
Once I went out to college, like all that cleared up. I'm not sure why.
I didn't know you grew up next door to me. So, and one thing we do know about all of these technologies at scale is they require a tremendous amount of energy.
Yeah.
A tremendous
amount. A lot of energy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I'd have to look at that. We have one in the office and it's kind of crazy, man. It fills up the entire, it's probably like 2 gallons. It fills that up every day of water. And I could go see what the electricity usage is on it. We could run a meter on it, but start looking at the same concepts. Like, do people care if there's a power, if there's a huge power demand needed to strip CO2 out, if it's being powered by windmills and solar, so who cares how much electricity it uses? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out. But
we talked last week about AI. The amount of electricity used by all the data centers in the world, with AI coming, it's going to double it.
Oh yeah.
So
Oracle did this event with NVIDIA back on Thursday or Friday and asked me to come speak at it. And I sat there.
Yeah, I thought I was going to be invited, and then Oracle called me after the fact and said, "We didn't need you, bro."
That's right. You weren't supposed to be there with me. You ditched me on that.
Thanks, Oracle.
But I'm
talking.
I was watching NVIDIA's presentation and. You just tell, there's insatiable demand for GPUs and servers and cloud computing with the rise of AI. And, you think about it both from a hardware perspective and then a power perspective. It's massive demand. So, yeah, those numbers don't surprise me at all.
Yeah, estimation and prediction are significantly more energy intensive than power intensive than calculation, CPU to GPU. It's pretty amazing.
By the way, I asked ChatGPT to write a song for me in the same spirit as George Strait's The Chair. And within literally 30 seconds, it came back and I was like, damn, that's pretty good. So I'm thinking about becoming a songwriter. And I know you are. But I just ChatGPT songs and I go to just live in Nashville and I could be like,
that's all
think
it
about
takes,
that
dude.
business we could make.
That's all it takes.
All we need is one hit, bro.
So there's
that's all it takes.
Mark, you in?
I'm in.
Not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I've been playing with agents, and there's this thing called AutoGPT, and essentially you run a little bit of Python code, and you can run this AI agent, and you can say, "Hey, I want to create a app that finds me the lowest gas price in Houston." And it will sit there and you don't have to keep prompting it. It will go through a sequential order of prompts itself, and you can allow it to click through things. So it'll tell you, hey, I'm going to this website. I found this. Couldn't find this. I'm going over to this website, and it'll just auto run itself until it's built you that thing. And there's this version, it's called Autonomous. And next to it, it's got a skull emoji and says, run this at your own risk. This runs 24/7. It may take actions that you don't authorize and no one really knows what it does. But imagine you give this thing authorization to have access to your funds, to your credit card. You give it password so it can go click around on things. And then it just runs 24/7 on your machine. And like, who even knows what it's doing? It's coming up with new shit to do on its own. And so,
Well, if we could only figure
AI is
out
kinda
how to
getting-
find someone else's credit card number, that would be helpful.
I wouldn't put it past it. AI is kind of getting out of control now. So,
Well, and just to segue, we'll go back to energy news, but China GPT. So Chinese tech companies like Baidu and Alibaba are racing to build a government-approved versions of AI bots like ChatGPT, but they'll need to uphold strict censorship rules laid out this month. So China's on the bandwagon.
yeah, you know what's crazy is TikTok's algorithm is so fucking insane how good it is. I mean, they're leagues ahead of Facebook, Google. I'll give you an example. There's this comedian that's blowing up. His name's Matt Rife, I believe, and he's so funny. And he does this comedy skit the other day, and there's this cougar out in the audience. I mean, she's a babe, and he starts doing some crowd work with her, and she's like, "Oh, you should see my daughter." And so he sees a picture of her daughter, and then he FaceTimes her daughter in front of the crowd. It becomes this whole skit, super funny. Well, I'm watching that on TikTok. The next day, that lady out in the crowd pops up on my TikTok, like her TikTok in the feed did. And then I watched her video, and then the next day her daughter popped up. And I'm like, that's how good TikTok is like it'll go find parts of videos and then start pushing them.
I mean, the
to
metadata
people,
is
so
just so valuable
it's crazy.
if you know how to
So
leverage it.
I imagine that China is already very advanced when it comes to these algorithms and neural networks. So I find it interesting that they're already taking, I mean, we've had a crackdown here in the US where people like Elon want us to take a break and set some regulation for AI. So it doesn't surprise me that
That was a
China's
great
already-
interview, by the way. Speaking of from one dangerous country to another, let's talk a little bit about Russia, Mark. What's happening there?
Yeah, it was just
from one dangerous country to another.
yeah, just
Dangerous. Whatever that means.
Bit of an update on sanctions. Doomberg put a piece out over the weekend called the Peter Principle, really just assessing what has happened relative to the West's sanctions on Russian crude exports. And as always, there's unintended consequences and things backfire. So the back door in this case, and I didn't really know the numbers, the back door in this case is really displacement of OPEC crude imported into India by Russian crude, deeply discounted Russian crude, which is then refined into distillate or diesel and gasoline. And lo and behold, things like 40% of recent region imports into New York are those Indian refined products, displacing other refined products. So Russian barrels and molecules are ultimately finding their way into.
You go back before y'all were on the show, me and Chuck talked about this for about 3 weeks solid when the war started. Is like, you can sanction all you want, but oil's a global market. It finds its way through the system somehow.
No, I think, and part of me is I think also our people that are running this country know that too.
Yeah.
It's a way to backdoor.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate.
The larger point is price always trumps volume, right? So another indicator of I guess backfiring is that over this period, Russia has generated a trade surplus, which is equivalent to 18% of its GDP. So that's, kind of a huge positive. Meanwhile,
material.
we respond after the sanctions don't do what's intended, or prices remain stubbornly high, which is a political hot potato. Things like draining the SPR.
Yeah.
Well, frame
So-
this for me, Mark.
I feel like we get beat 4D chess politically all the time by China and Russia. but-
Absolutely. And what's interesting is, and I don't have last year's data, but I have 2 years of data. Texas is still a larger economy than Russia,
Yeah.
but we seem to talk about Russia all the time.
Yeah.
Why don't we as Texans invade somebody? I mean, I don't really want Mexico because that's like, I don't think we can beat the cartels.
Yeah. We,
Well, you have a presidential candidate who's out there talking about that very thing in terms of response to the cartels and fentanyl in general. And
Let's invade Oklahoma. Bring them.
I think we
liberate
should
them with-
take at least Oklahoma and New Mexico.
We're going to liberate Oklahoma with good barbecue.
Yeah. I don't want Louisiana, but they do have good food.
No, you do.
though.
You want Louisiana.
Should we take Louisiana?
I feel like we take Louisiana, Oklahoma,
Texas.
Arkansas.
Yeah, I'd take Arkansas. It's good golf there.
Yeah.
Oklahoma
All right.
has some good
That's
golf.
Good duck hunting
That's
too.
where we'll start. Yep.
All right. You heard it here first.
So it's just, just
We just got put on the
just
list.
an assessment of a year end.
FBI is going to raid us.
Well, they already are on Mark's back door. So, and there's a reason Chuck's not here too.
Yeah, Chuck's. We can't speak of what happened to Chuck. All right, we got completely off topic, Mark.
Mark's stunned.
So
So I saw a tweet by Arjun Murti yesterday who was talking about a story that was out, and it's related to an East Africa pipeline. It's actually called the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline, which has been in the works for several years, almost a decade. And it's a pipeline that runs from the producing region of Uganda down to the Tanzanian coast. It's about just a little under 900 miles. They laid the foundation stone in 2017, and not much progress has been made. I think they got to FID a short time ago, but these banks who they're looking for 2 to 3 billion of the 5 billion to fund the project are pulling out or declining to participate. And the latest of which was Standard Chartered, which is a big European bank.
what's the reason for pulling out?
The reason for pulling out was it doesn't align with, our climate principles.
Yeah.
There's been a tremendous amount of pushback from various
Yeah.
climate and other
I figured
environmental
that's what it
related
was,
groups. It's just another very large example of, what are we doing to the developing world and trying to push for a complete leapfrog over, the first step to getting out of energy poverty, which, for the rest of the world, in the developed world, it started with the industrialization driven by fossil fuels. But, this is becoming a larger problem, not only with the big banks, but also with the insurance and the reinsurance
That's what I was
companies
just
as well.
about to get as the insurance.
Yeah.
I talked, I'm
Mhm.
not going to say her name, but a lady reached out to me that works for a big insurance tech company. And within that, she's created this insurance product that's built for oil and gas companies. And it's kind of like this monitoring product where I'm going to butcher it, but I don't want to get into it. But her whole thing is like, I don't feel like people are talking about this enough. She's like, I listened to y'all's podcast, and she's like, you are completely on point. She's like, but where they kill this is from the insurance providers. She's like, you can't get any assets underwritten if you can't insure them. And
Right.
she's like, and that's what's happening right now. And so that seems to be a pretty big,
And it's snowballing.
Yeah.
Right. So, and if you look at the world population outlook between now and 2050, 1.6 billion people to be added to the world. All of that comes from the developing world. And I think 1.2 billion of that comes from essentially 5 countries in Africa.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
But
That's
they've
crazy.
done, but that analysis was done pre-COVID. You think that's going to change
which analysis?
of the population growth?
I don't think it's going to change. I mean, those are the underlying just
Fundamentals.
proportions of, and
Yeah.
I took a quick
I feel like the
gander at,
population growth could go it could go either way. You either have population collapse, which people like Elon.
Well, here in the
seem to
U.S.,
be-
it's definitely collapsing because of the lack of children.
Yeah. No, but I
And,
mean, that's a
due
thing.
to infertility, due to a
That's a-
lot of things.
Yeah,
but-
theme across the world. I think what's interesting about Africa too is just the black market there for oil is wild too. I've seen videos where you just have these, super makeshift operations where they're siphoning oil off of pipelines like in Nigeria and shit like that. And, it's just so much corruption that allows that to happen. That's why I was curious if the banks were pulling out if it was ESG climate related or if it was just given the market.
That's the majority of focus of what's going on with things like the East Africa oil pipeline. So I was looking for a graph. Here it is. So if you look at oil demand, and this is on a per capita basis, if you take the US, Canada, EU, and Japan in terms of barrels per capita per year, it's right at 7,000.
Yeah.
And if you look at the rest of the world, and the dots in these bars are pretty big, it's somewhere in the 1,500. Point being is that, to elevate out of energy poverty or get to those rungs of developed world standard of living and GDP is going to require an increase in developing world energy consumption going forward. When you layer in the fact that a disproportionate amount of the population growth, in fact, all of it is going to, of that 1.6 billion between now and 2050 is going to occur in the developing world, not the developed world.
Yeah.
It's an interesting intersection.
There's one thing I want to talk about before we go on. Mark said I get to do the riff this week, which I'm going to use for our finger of the week. But before we get to
Love
that,
it.
I'm sure y'all saw the charts going around. Man, I can't remember the guy's name. I hate that I can't remember his name. That generated the charts, but it was showing California's duck curve for solar energy prices. And this thing was going viral. I think it's kind of funny that no one thought that was going to happen or be a problem where you overbuild all of this solar and all of a sudden when you're at peak solar during the daytime, there's so much energy on the grid that we're running into negative prices now, right? And there's just no market for it. And one thing I hear all the time is when you
transmit, kind of like trying to sell gas at Waha.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's the same exact thing, right?
Sorry, Dan Morrison.
The one thing I hear constantly on Twitter and in the energy community is we need more transmission. We need more transmission. We need more transmission. But transmission doesn't necessarily solve that problem unless you're just saying, oh, hey, we're going to transmit all this power. California's going to power all neighboring states with solar. But it's really a battery storage problem. And Mark, I think you told me something last week about just on a per minutes basis, we have like enough battery storage for like 20 minutes.
The residential and non-residential static or fixed battery storage build out will create capacity equivalent to about 24 minutes.
It's not just storage
for the U.S.
I think one of the things, and I spend a lot of time talking to executives about this, it's not just storage. With the duck curves, originally energy was produced centrally and then it was sent out to the nodes. Mm-hmm. Today you have energy produced at the nodes and the grid was never designed for you to push energy back.
Yeah.
And so the most efficient way to manage that is to produce and distribute locally. So and Europe is a lot further ahead on these self-consumption laws, but Europe is really trying hard to, if we have excess capacity, how does a neighbor take your excess solar and use that energy? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a mechanical issue. It's more of a markets issue.
Yeah.
And figuring out how to settle power locally. There is storage that is needed, no doubt.
Yeah.
But if you had localities that were able to produce and sell locally, that's how it works. And there's a cool company that's based out of Brooklyn that created a little community to do that. There are areas around the world trying this, especially in Europe, in Sweden, in Norway. But that's the biggest issue. It's not just the storage, but it's like there is no mechanism. And California regulators have talked about this over the last few years. They just don't know how to create the market, and the markets is not there yet.
Yeah, no, I mean that's if you're talking about it on a physics basis, you talk about storage and transmission, but when you talk about it from a commercialization basis, I think one of the problems is that you even see it here in Texas, like, hey, if I have solar and battery at my house and I have excess, like I should be able to push it back
But
to the grid,
CenterPoint
right?
will let you do that.
Yeah. And that's what you have a lot of misaligned incentives to be able to do those things. But when you talk about, distributed energy networks and load balancing, I mean, in a perfect world, yeah, we'd be able to build all of that out right now and be able to manage all of this. So we have excess power over here, we can send it over there, but we're a long ways away from that currently. And you're talking about getting utilities to get on board, which is a pretty burdensome.
So we're seeing a situation with what happens when you have a lot of stranded power.
Yeah. So this is what I think is interesting about it. And we've seen this happen in Texas and in ERCOT, when Winter Storm Uri happened. I'm sitting there watching the numbers live, and I remember wind going out, right? And everyone's shitting on wind. And I remember saying, hey, natural gas is next. Worked in the field when it's cold. I know what's happening or what's going to happen. Boom, natural gas supply chain goes out. Well, then the whole narrative got changed. They're like, oh, no, natural gas is the reason for power outages in Winter Storm Uri. The problem is nat gas is the only power source that has the ability to ramp up very quickly.
Absolutely.
And in Texas, what our problem is that we have built up wind so aggressively, I mean, extremely quick, and capital stops going into backup power generation, and rightfully so, because it doesn't become economic. This is what you see in California. You still have to run nat gas backup generation, but now your electricity prices are at zero or negative. And so the numbers just don't make sense from the nat gas side, but you need them so that you can ramp up during the evening. And so that's the problem that I have in the renewable space is everyone talks about renewables are cheaper, but what it reminds me of is peak oil and gas shale, when we're like, oh, these wells do 40% IRR at half cycle economics. When I learned what half cycle economics were, I'm like, you're backing out your land costs, your G&A,
Facilities.
like everything. Like, yeah, no shit.
Everything.
No shit, it's profitable. It's the same thing that's happening over renewables where, and I've talked to people in renewables because they're like, oh yeah, well, battery's that's not the asset developers thing. They just worry about building out the solar. But me as a citizen, it matters to me. What is the cost from end to end, from building the asset to having storage, to having backup power, to putting in new transmission distribution lines? Like that's the conversation that needs to be had, is that everything needs to be looked at from end to end.
Yeah. It's like, you got to put a fancy adjective in front of cost, like levelized. It reminds me of how we used to talk about crude oil price as well, the normalized crude oil price. Well, what does that mean?
I have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
I've learned one thing is like when you start getting into LCOE and normalize, like usually it's a bunch of financial engineering
and there's stuff left out.
Smoke and mirrors. Yeah.
As you pointed out.
Well, tell me what the natural gas price is today.
I don't even know.
Didn't even look.
Yeah. And the question is, from where? Because there is no natural gas price.
Yeah.
Which hub are you talking about?
I mean, we just run off a Henry Hub. So, but, Henry Hub can be $3 and California can be getting wrecked at
that's right.
$8 or $9. So
that's right.
But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that the coolest future of energy is bidirectional grids, and especially from
absolutely,
like, Tesla has a deal with PG&E in California, and if you have the Tesla battery wall and you enroll in this, it'll say, hey, it's noon, we're charging up your batteries, and at 6 p.m. we're going to have peak demand and we're going to pay you for your electricity. And it's not very meaningful right now. I think they have like 14,000 homes enrolled in it, and it'll put out like 15 megawatts. But think about that at scale, like that's pretty fucking cool, being able to do things like that. So,
I need to tell you about the retail electricity provider I tried to start. But anyway, it was ahead of its time.
I don't think you knew me during Winter Storm Uri, but I had Gritty, which is the wholesale.
Yeah. They were they were after us.
I was getting so many followers on Twitter because I'm live tweeting all of my updates.
Dude, I mean, their model was different from mine, but they got wrecked.
Yeah. Gritty, I'm going to give a shout out to Gritty because everyone likes to talk shit and shit on Gritty. But from a user experience and customer support perspective, they were super good as a company. I think they just had a really shitty business model because most people don't understand wholesale. They don't understand.
That was the problem.
They don't understand the risk. I do. But most people don't. And when you start communicating and it's like turn off your electricity now, go get another electricity provider and get a blanket to stay warm. Like that's not, that's not the best messaging for most people. So anyways, we should do a whole nother podcast sometime on that topic. Cause I think that it's a exciting.
Let's do it.
So, all right, let's talk about finger of the week and my topic to riff on.
Riff of the week.
Riff of the week. Do we get rid of finger of the week? Is it just riff of the week?
No,
now?
you said not finger of the week. You said riff of the week.
Did y'all change it?
We hadn't seen you in so long. I just wanted you to riff
All
on
right,
whatever
well,
you want to riff on.
Here's my riff, and also my finger of the week is there is this narrative of woke attacks against oil and gas that has just got to the point of being absurd. Terms being used like toxic Petro-masculinity. And
dude, what a great word though.
It is. Like, I think it kind of goes hard. I'm like, I embrace that. Petro-masculinity.
I'm going to look on that on Twitter and tell you what comes up.
And, you know, studies being cited about the masculinity from the oil and gas industry to shut down women who are successful, you know, fighting for climate and are essentially propagating disinformation around climate change. And the main one on this is it's Greta's successor, Sophia
Kiani.
Yeah. And I would love to do a podcast with her because I actually think that she's smart. I just think that she's extremely misinformed about a lot of things, but I do think that she's, you know, I do think that she's intelligent. But
well, she goes to Stanford. I mean, isn't everyone genius there?
I'll stay quiet. But using terms like this, it's just bullshit. It's bullshit. It's virtue signaling. It's not constructive at all for the world's energy crisis or for making a more sustainable world. So I think that, you know, they're one move away from making it racist. That's the only is that they're missing in there is that they have, you know, it's misogynistic. It's this whole movement propagated by oil and gas. And to kind of add on to this, clean creatives, I've been going at clean creatives for a while now because during Southwest, they did this ice cream truck and it was Carbon and Cream, I think was the name of it. And this was like all of their ice creams, like they had one for Shell and it was like all death kind of themed. And it was talking about how oil and gas companies were killing the planet. And I laughed at them because the picture that they took for all of the press, they're sitting there and the exhaust tailpipe of the truck is right there by their feet. I'm like, you guys are literally using a gas powered food truck and diesel generator to do this. Well, again, the founder of Clean Creatives, he's also, I believe, the founder of 350.org. He got an article in the New York Times talking about or lobbying for the name natural gas to be changed to methane because natural gas is it's nothing but a marketing campaign from the oil and gas industry to make it seem cleaner. And so I retweeted him and I put out articles. It was like, natural gas is used to differentiate the difference between natural and synthetic gas, which synthetic gas was commercialized before natural gas in the late 1800s, early 1900s. That's where it came from. It's like, it's not some conspiracy for oil and gas to make it. Wildcatters weren't sitting there 150 years ago like, oh, hey, we should make this natural organic so that people accept it. No, it was to differentiate the difference between synthetic. And so anyways, he got in my mentions and him and I were kind of going back and forth at it. And I just think that these people are extremely misinformed and spewing a lot of bullshit out there. And I've made it my mission to combat that. So I
was doing some research for our next country in Europe on their energy profile and was looking at Italy, but that doesn't, we're going to defer that next discussion or the next country to next week when Chuck's back.
To Chuck.
But I did come across the term fossil gas in the discussion of the generation stack for this particular country, which was Italy. So
yeah, they're fossil gas, fossil methane. That's what they're pushing.
Well, let me
for.
ask you guys a serious question. Are you petro-masculine?
I honestly don't know what it means, but I like the way it sounds.
I do too. Like, I don't know what it means, but I'm like, I'm petro-masculine.
Nobody
Hell
knows
yeah,
what it means, but
I
it's
am.
provocative. It gets the
What are
people
you, Mark?
going.
Are you petro-masculine?
Well, I have a petroleum engineering degree, the root word of which is petro, and
And you're masculine?
And I'm masculine.
You don't have a...
Here's the thing that I hate about it is this is why people, and when I say people, I mean young women like Greta and Sophia are put up on a pedestal, is because now it makes it hard to attack their ideas. Or you get toxic people out there that, do attack their looks or the fact that they're female. But the reason that they do this is because they're hard to touch. And so you can't say, hey, I disagree with your ideas. You don't have the credentials. You don't have the experience. You're not a scientist. You're not talking about data and facts. You can't say those things now without being labeled a petro-masculinist petro-misogynistic person that's spreading disinformation about climate. Like that's how
that's what they want to do.
I want to tie this back to...
It's not what they want to do. They are doing it. They're saying those things on Twitter. So
this is another of the almost infinite number of examples in the media and social media today of this huge distraction the West has been on about the culture wars, right? And, the Ugandan pipeline is another example. Someone is going to step in, if it's not in the East Africa crude oil pipeline, but someone is going to step in and make sure those profitable and strategic investments get made, those projects get done, the relationships, the balance of power, if you will, changes. And those are our strategic adversaries, as I think I said last week, are more than happy for us to continue to be distracted.
Absolutely.
With all of the culture war and the rhetoric. And
why do you think China has been colonizing Africa?
I mean, the adults are making long-term decisions and the children keep fighting over terminology. It really is what's happening.
If you wanted to have just an endless stream of protests to make, go to China and set up at all of these new coal-fired power generation facilities they're bringing online.
What about all the plastic waste coming out of China into the oceans? I mean, like, it's endless.
Yeah, I've always naively believed that the best route would be to depoliticize the rhetoric and the terminology that we use to focus on pollution, right?
It's actually like, I was talking about that because, I made this tweet. Like, what was the tweet? Oh, I said climate change isn't even in the top 3 threats to human existence right now. It's nuclear war, viral pandemic, and artificial intelligence. And I can actually argue that climate change doesn't even make the top 5. But someone had commented, what did you just say? I lost my train of thought. It's whatever you said I was going towards.
Pollution,
yeah. That's their thing is plastic pollution is much more of a crisis than
it's horrible
climate is right now. And I was like, how do we just kind of let plastic, not just plastic waste, but plastic consumption? I mean, I was at HEB a while back, and like, I'm not a person to like get triggered or offended, but I'm walking in the fruit aisle, and they had a little chunk of watermelon. I'm not talking a whole slice. I'm not talking a bunch of chunks. One chunk of watermelon that you could buy, and it's in a hard plastic case. And I'm like, what the fuck are we doing with single-use
Because the younger
plastics?
generation wants everything to be easy and grab and go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's convenience. We're sacrificing for convenience.
Yeah.
Well, and that famous photo you see of the plastic island and how it's segmented into who contributes, which countries contribute most, and the largest is the Philippines. And you don't see many, if any, quote unquote, rich countries as the major offenders for the ocean plastic pollution. Well, to your point, that is a tangible, addressable pollution problem that we can go and commit resources and time
And solve it.
to helping
Yep.
mitigate, to solve it, right?
Yeah.
And provide the resources and the funding to do that. I mean, how is all this plastic ending up? Well, it's, poor communities who, throw trash in the river, or, it's just their focus is on their well-being and survival day to day, not
Yeah. One question I asked on Twitter to follow that up with, and we'll end the show here in a second, but one question I asked was, okay, assuming that we figure out human CO2 emissions and we develop the technology to do that. Let's just make the assumption that we do. We know for a fact through documentation that we've had at least 5 ice ages pre-human existence. And so climate change is a thing that happens naturally. Do we think that we have the ability to steer climate in the future outside of man-made CO2 emissions? And I think that we're extremely arrogant to think that we do. And I think that's even just from a technological perspective. But then you look from a political perspective, like right now, I bet Russia would love some global warming because they're unlocking a ton of land and resources that weren't
They
easily
could farm
accessible. Yeah.
a lot
So
more.
now you have misaligned incentives between people, different governments and countries around the world of, hey, what is optimal climate? And so anyways, I just think that we need to have real discussions about, what we can, what we can't solve. And I always try to focus on the things that you can directly solve and impact, and plastic pollution and consumption is one of those things.
And we do some amazing things with computer simulation and modeling, but these predictions are modeling outcomes, right? For models that are inherently limited and have varying degrees, in some cases, significant amounts of error. Speaking as an old reservoir engineer who used to do some simulation, if you can't get your model to history match, how reliable is it for a prediction, right?
Yeah.
And so natural systems are inherently complex. They're 3-dimensional. They're
and you can't isolate
dynamic.
variables.
There's a lot of randomness, and how do you model that? I think one of the best comparisons that I've seen are just the discussion on the modeling front is we don't have the computing power to and the speed to get to an appropriate simulation of marine and cloud layers in these 3-dimensional grids down to a resolution that
we can make decisions based on.
Well, you can rely more that there's not just huge error.
Yeah.
And that's going from 100 on the surface area part of it, going from 100 square kilometers to 10. So an order of magnitude reduction, which creates a lot more calculations, right? Those calculations, if we had the capacity to do that with computing we have today, would take 100 years to run a simulation.
Yeah.
Not saying we're not going to get there, but
let me tell you my other 3 natural threats before we get off. One, I was going to write these in there, but I don't really care to debate on other things that might be more detrimental to humans. But I was going to put an EMP from a solar flare. And it was funny because as I typed that out, we had a solar flare hit Earth last week, and it caused us to be able to see the northern lights all the way down into the southern part of the United States. I'm like, those happen all the time. You get one that's bad enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it can take out every electronic, the grid, and boom. I don't think that we fare very well from that. Second one, asteroid. We like to pretend that we can't just get hit with a fucking asteroid at any minute, and that happens.
No, we just send oil and gas guys up to destroy it, right?
We need a little bit of toxic petro-masculinity to go solve that problem. And the third one is we're way overdue for the poles to flip. And that scares the shit out of me too. That when they say when the poles flip, that happens in a matter of weeks or months. And you want to talk about potential climate.
We need more electric cars because then you'll get the compass to flip.
Get a little bit.
Yeah. You need more magnets.
There you go. We're going to do some.
We're doing it.
I don't know if that's geoengineering or what that is, but we'll make it happen.
It's common sense.
So
all right.
Is this our first double album for BDE?
Double album?
Yeah, it's
What's I'm not getting the reference.
we've been here for a while.
Oh,
It's a long show.
I'm just glad to be back. I'm not even
Hey,
sure.
it's
We're
good
glad
to
to
have
have
you,
you
man.
All right. We will end it on that note, though. So if you enjoyed this week's show, share it with a friend, share it online on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and we will catch y'all next week.